Ahoy! I once again scanned the entire deep desert PvP area, including all of the resources, so we will have a look over it. We will see what we can find this week, because this week is very, very different. The resource allocation is completely different from previous weeks. There's some crazy hotspots as well as generally more resources of almost all kinds. So we should look into that and talk about what the new layout is. As always, if you appreciate this kind of work, you help me out greatly if you subscribe and click the bell. First of all, here is a general resource overview for this week. As you can see, the map looks quite different in layout as well. That's because the DD mapping tool on GitHub from Defense has been updated. So it's a lot more detailed now, which is very helpful in various ways. And we'll get into that. Somebody missed it last week. I'm just going to quickly point it out. These are the icons for all of the different resources. You can see that there are now icons for the islands with only the specific resource that you're looking for in a very high concentration, and also for Stravidium and Titanium nodes. And there are some areas that obviously have some more nodes than others still, so I can't. And there are obviously some islands that have some in-between level of resource that I can't really mark this way, but I think generally I can give you a pretty good idea through these icons now. So when you see this map, what you'll immediately notice is that there are 3 resource islands, as well as a total of 6 spice fields, and that's the large ones, possibly more if I missed one, as well as a ton of smaller amounts of resources, pretty much all over the deep desert in a much larger quantity than what we previously had. Let's go through the rows, starting with E and F. E is the half PvP and PvE one as usual, and we can actually see already that, for example, he has a single titanium ore. I didn't mark that on the map, but we can see sometimes small amounts here, like Stravidium in E2, similar things like that. But if we're going up here, just into F1, we already have our first spice field around the center right away. Also have a cave here, and a little bit of resources. Once again, just a single node of each here, so I'm not going to mark that on the map. And also a first control point right in the corner. I'm not going to name all the control points. If you are interested in that, you can look up the logos. I think for most people they are not that relevant. And then if we go over to F2, you can also see a little bit of Stravidium right at the corner here. Same thing again in E2. And moving on from there, we're getting in an area with E3 that has one of the control points, but also a shipwreck. And then just north of that in F3, once again, smaller amount of high tier resources, especially around the corner here. So all of these are kind of worth looking over, at least if you're looking for resources. But then where things get really, really interesting is in F4, which is kind of the start of the hot zone around here. We can see a control point, we can see a testing station, and more importantly, we have a Stravidium island here. This area right between F4 and E4 is a full-on Stravidium island, so it's right by the edge of the PvP, PvE crossing. You can basically, technically set a base up down here, and you will be right by Stravidium Island, number 1. This is obviously a highly contested area, and it will be even more contested once we go further up, where we have another island, as well as just to the east around here, where we have another spice field. So lots and lots of combat. If you have a big guild, if you have a lot of friends that you're playing with, then this would be the place to set up this week, just to contest things. But as a solo player, this is extremely risky territory, I would say, depending on how populated your server is. I marked on E5 that up here there is a potential shipwreck, a dynamic shipwreck that can crash from the sky. I mark this as shipwreck ×2 because that icon isn't really used for anything else anymore, because the ×2 tiles as such no longer exist anymore with the new layout of the website. So instead I'm using that for dynamic shipwrecks that I know of. Of course, there are always more of those. Then if we move on further to F6, there is just a control point here, so a bit more relaxed. And going down to E6, there's actually a little bit of titanium and Stravidium here. Again, much easier to get all throughout the deep desert now than it was the case before. The shortages will probably mostly be spice. In E7, we see a similar thing, just a few higher tier resources here off to the right side. And then if we go north, we once again have a few of the higher tier resources, a little bit more here in F7, as well as a control point and a shipwreck. While F8 itself is very barren, E8 has a testing station down here, and you can put your base right next to it, which is pretty nice if you're interested in that. Unfortunately, the testing stations this week don't have particularly good rewards, so not really that worth it unless you're doing it for bodies. F9 has a surprising amount of resources around here, a decent amount of Stravidium especially, but as far as I recall, also a little bit of titanium here, for example, so it can be worth stopping by. And then down here in E9, roughly around here, there is a dynamic shipwreck as well. We also see, once again, single titanium node. Moving on with G1 is very empty, and what's really weird here is you can see these islands actually don't have any resources at all. They only kind of start here. I don't know if this is a bug. I checked them multiple times. I don't think they were just harvested. I think there is just nothing on there. So that's really strange. Doesn't seem intentional, but anyways, just a few resources down here. Not really worth in this area. If we go a little bit further to G3, we get a control point on an aluminum island, and then a little bit of resources here. Again, nothing super crazy. What matters for us is G4. Keep in mind, we have the E4 and F4 where the Stravidium Island is, and right here, this is Titanium Island. It doesn't look like much, but this is actually just titanium all around. Crazy amount. I'm not sure why not more of that is showing up. So definitely worth farming, and a control point here as well. And then a little bit more small amounts of resources off to the side too. And if we go further to G5, there's just a little bit of resources here in comparison. So not super crazy, but the north is still pretty solid, I would say. But where we really want to go is to G6, because in G6 we have another Stravidium island right in the middle. So we have multiple of these middle islands next to, like, 2 tiles away from each other, as well as control point here again with a big amount of resources. And in the north we also have, once again, a decent amount of extra resources. In G7, where we are somewhat safer, I would say, a bit away from the hot zones, we still get a solid amount of Stravidium especially, and here off to the side we got a little bit of titanium as well. We got a little cave here too. In G8, just a little bit of resources, just a smaller amount of stuff to the north. And in G9, a surprisingly high amount of resources. No concentration like on the pure islands, but still a decent pool, I would say, around here especially. And then if you go north, you're kind of running into basalt, but there's a control point, but then there's some more up here. The very left of H1 has a potential dynamic shipwreck. Then moving on to H2, we have a control point as well as a little bit of titanium and Stravidium, relatively small amounts though. And then in H3 we have significantly more. We have a control point here and iron to the north, but then all these smaller islands here have some of the high tier resources, which are pretty solid to farm. In H4 there is just one spot here towards the north with a control point and with various resources. Again, reasonable amounts here. And in H5 we have quite a few towards the left of the area. In H6 we have a control point to the north, as well as some resources around here, like left to middle-ish. In H7, similar thing, just a solid amount of resources. Once again, a little bit to the bottom here as well. Not quite enough for me to mark it though. Did mark it on H8, where we have a fair bit more, along with a testing station too. On the other side of the tile we also have some more resources. And then in H9 we have a little bit in the middle here, kind of worth having a look at. But more importantly, around here in the north we have a spice field once again. And last but not least, in row I we have all the spice. This is the spice row this week. I1 itself only has some resources and a testing station in the bottom right here. But moving on to I2, not only do we see a decent amount of resources at the bottom, but also in the center there is the first spice field in this row. Moving on to I3, we have a little bit of resources bottom left, and that's pretty much it. But then in I4, while it looks empty, we once again have a spice field around here. I5, once again, couple of resources throughout, a decent amount, and we also have a shipwreck with some resources around the shipwreck and a control point. And then in I6 we can see some more resources to the bottom left. Also around here I found a dynamic shipwreck, and in I7 around here I also found a dynamic shipwreck, but more importantly I also found another spice field around here. And when I say I mean Nux and I, thanks to Nux for helping me with these. In I8 we have a little bit of a medium concentration at the bottom left towards the center as well of resources, and then a control point in the bottom right. And I9, as far as I could find, is completely empty. I am absolutely expecting the hot zone to basically be in a triangle this week between G4, E4 and G6, because that is where all of the larger concentrations of high tier resources are, and multiple control points and a spice field, so all very close to the PvE area as well, so very easy to fly over the moment you spot it. Very high risk, high reward. Yeah, I don't see why anyone that has the urge to go for the risky zones and high amounts of resources wouldn't go there. But if you're a solo player, if you want to play it more safe, then I think the sides are much better options, because there are still plenty of spice fields around, there are still plenty of high tier resources, pretty much, especially around H2 to H3 to G2 to G3, and on the other side also somewhere between G8 and H9 seem to be solid spots to collect a fair amount, and you don't run into as much trouble. You have some nearby testing stations if you want to check them, and you have some nearby spice fields. And if you enjoyed this video, if you found this useful, then consider subscribing and clicking the bell. I think I won't be able to do the PvE one this week as well, because I will be quite busy with other videos. I wanted to do that last week, but then unfortunately I ran into a bug where I couldn't log in for more than a day, so that kind of fell off. I'll see if I'll be able to do it in the following weeks. But definitely also let me know if that's something you care about in the first place. So far it seems like most people are interested in the PvP one. Thanks to my patrons for supporting this video, and thank you for watching. Sloth out.